even after having fumbled and stumbled onto the main avenue of the heavenly capital, Tian was still covering half of his face with his hand, wobbly and unsteady the entire way. While none of the junior heavenly officials rushing about on the street dared to approach him to ask about it, nonetheless, they all stared at him strangely. Tian quickly dropped his hand, straightened his back, and rubbed his mouth unnaturally, muttering, "My lips kind of hurt. Don't know what's going on." The looks the junior officials gave him became even stranger. Just what did you have to do for your lips to hurt? It really did kind of hurt, actually. When he jumped up to crush into the kiss, he used too much force. Hua Cheng most likely felt the crash, but after Tian had pressed close, he could feel very clearly that Hua Cheng had smiled. He didn't dare to think more on the subject and hurried onward with his head down. And the other heavenly officials didn't stop him, all rushing their own way. Perhaps it was because the reopening of Mount Tonglu had become too hectic an affair, but the air of the entire heavenly court was solemn and uneasy. Within the great martial hall, there were already many heavenly officials gathered. While the resentful spirits of Mount Tonglu were sent in all directions, the majority was sent to the most populous royal capital. Tian and Hua Cheng had toiled until now because they chose the heaviest and roughest task. Everyone else only faced about a few hundred of those creatures and had long since finished them off. Pei Ming, Feng Xin, and the others had already returned to the heavenly capital, their faces lined with fatigue. However, when Tian crossed into the hall and looked up to greet people, the first one he saw was Lung Chencho, whom he hadn't seen in a long time. Lung Chencho's face was dark. When he saw Tian, he was also taken aback. Then he twisted his head around. The crowd were all deep in their thoughts, unspeaking. Junwu sat on the throne, and when he saw Tian had come, he rose a little, ready to speak, but Lung Chencho stepped forward first. "My lord, I heard you've already caught the green ghost Qi Rong." Junwu looked at him. "That's correct. However, the green ghost Qi Rong, the female ghost Xuanji, as well as the others, were not captured by my own hand. They were all consigned by Yin Yu of Ghost City." Only then did Tian notice that Yin Yu was present too. It couldn't be helped. Yin Yu really had no sense of presence. Speaking of, this was the first time Yin Yu had entered the great martial hall. Other than the highest ranking of heavenly officials, no other subjects could step foot within this hall without Junwu's permission. In the past, when Yin Yu was a heavenly official, he didn't have the right to enter since his rank was too low. Yet now that he had willingly fallen to the Ghost City, he could finally enter formally. Truly a complicated feeling. Lung Chencho cut right to the point. "Qi Rong is the enemy who destroyed my clan. Pray my lord leaves him at my disposal." Junwu glanced at Tian and hummed for a moment. "It's not that handing him over to you would be a problem. However, I ask you, what comes after you have dealt with the green ghost Qi Rong? What will you do?" Originally, when Lung Chencho had left, he threatened that after he was done with Qi Rong, he would come looking for Tian. This was something Junwu had known. Lung Chencho's voice was hard. "That will not be my lord's concern. My lord can't possibly plan on acquitting Qi Rong just because I don't answer this question and prevent me from avenging my family." In the past, he rarely spoke within the great martial hall, and even when he did, it would be something silly. Yet now, When he spoke up, his expressions and his tone of voice were filled with resentment. This was not a good state to be in, and Pei Ming spoke up. Your Highness Tai Hua seems to have quite the temper today, eh? Of course, my lord doesn't plan on quitting. But just as he was trying to smooth things over, the sound of commotion came from outside the hall, and someone charged in. My lord, I can't wait any longer. It was actually Mu Ching. He was dressed in black, his face grim. Several of the martial officials behind him were supposed to be apprehending him, but how could they possibly be capable of it? So they came rushing in too. My lord, we were just sending General Xuanzhen to... Junwu sighed, his hand supporting his cheek, and waved. I understand. Step down, he said. A moment later he lifted his head and gazed toward Mu Ching. And so? Mu Ching proclaimed with a steel voice. And so, I cannot continue to endure these baseless accusations. Hasn't my lord already captured that woman? I want to confront her face to face. Long Chen Chou spoke up too. My lord, please hand me the green ghost Qirong as well. The two both spoke with raised voices, making the scene appear riotous, and it was giving Junwu a headache. Silence! Can you both not wait until I have finished dealing with Mount Tonglu? Mu Ching reasoned. If my lord needs to manage the resentful spirits leaked from the kiln, then you need hands. What's the use in keeping me locked up? Why not let me clear my name so I can return to my service to the heavenly court? As long as my lord brings her up to have me confront her, the truth will come out. His words were logical, and if he wasn't given his way, he would probably be relentless. So Junwu could only command. Bring up the female ghost, Jian Lan. Soon after, Jian Lan was brought forth. In her arms was a bundle that looked like swaddling clothes, and it emitted a chilling black aura. From within the bundle, something tragically pale that resembled a hand, but not. Something that resembled bones, but not. Poked out, baring its teeth and claws. But it was forcibly stuffed back into the bundle. She wasn't restrained with her arms twisted back by the arresting officers, probably to give Feng Xin face. Feng Xin swallowed lightly, meeting her eyes with his for a moment before Jian Lan looked away first. Then Feng Xin's gaze fell on the swaddling clothes in her arms, and his look grew even more complicated. Mu Ching, on the other hand, was already at the end of his patience, and the moment she came, he spoke. I don't know why your son must slander me, but it knows for sure that I'm not the culprit. It must be under someone else's control. He was losing his composure, but Xilin could understand. Mu Ching was someone who cared deeply about face, and to have a chamber pot sitting on his head for so long, even going as far as to affect his duty in the upper court, he was naturally filled to the brim with raw temper. Junwu questioned, and by your conjecture, who do you think is controlling it? Mu Ching didn't speak, but his gaze moved, and everyone could tell he was looking at Jian Lan. The veins on Feng Xin's forehead instantly popped. What are you trying to say? Do you think she would purposely have her son slander you? Mu Ching withdrew his gaze and replied, I didn't say anything of the sort. Then why were you looking at her? Feng Xin exclaimed. She bears no grudge toward you, so why would she do such a thing? Mu Ching glared at him. There's certainly no grudge between us, but who knows about you? And what do you mean by that? Feng Xin demanded. Just say everything out all at once. Mu Cheng glanced at Xilian. You were acquainted with the Lady Jianlan during the time of His Highness's first banishment, right? The other officials also followed along and looked to Xilian. Xilian was confused. How did he get dragged in again? Fengxin glanced at him too and gritted out with quiet anger. What does that have to do with anything? Mu Cheng stopped caring and let everything go, thoroughly ripping things out into the open. Of course it has to do with everything. At the time, life by His Highness's side was staggeringly difficult, and you also hated me, the one who had returned to the middle court to the bone. You loved digging through my history to berate my wrongs, and since she's your bedmate, how could she not hate me by the subliminal influence? Who knows, maybe she also started hating His Highness, because in the end, you still didn't take her away, and instead chose to continue your wretched loyalty. It was practically abandonment. But Fengxin couldn't bear this anymore and roared, "Stop your bullshit!" His fist flew out, and Mu Cheng raised his own to return the blow. Jianlan went up to stop them, but that fetus spirit started cackling weirdly, much like the chaotic cries of old crows, exceedingly horrifying. Pei Ming and Yin Yu both pulled Fengxin and Mu Cheng back separately, while Chuan Yijin was standing on the side, staring, seeming to be contemplating who'd win if they started a fight. In any case, it was a mess in the hall. Xilian stood there quietly for a good while, hanging his head. After a moment, he sighed and reminded, "My lord, the priority right now should be to find White No Face and manage the human face disease. It's the person we captured earlier who is the most important piece of the puzzle." Junwu couldn't watch any longer either and waved his hand. "Take the female ghost Jianlan and the fetus spirit away. Bring forth the Guosha of Shenle." Mu Cheng shouted, "No! I gotta see..." "What?" Fengxin was also dumbfounded. "Bring who?" The two both looked to the entrance of the hall. Wasn't the one brought over by a martial official none other than the Guosha of Shenle, whom they were both very familiar with, Mei Nianqing? Fengxin and Mu Cheng were both flabbergasted. Fengxin ventured, "Guosha? Is it really Guosha?" Mu Cheng didn't say anything, but he was also stunned and unsure. They couldn't be blamed. In truth, even now, Xilian still felt things were kind of surreal. He couldn't connect this man with the Guosha who once asked him the question of 2 men and a cup of water. Mei Nianqing stepped forward languidly, brushing past Xilian. Junwu sat overlooking the great hall. "Shenle, when we were down below, you seemed to have something to say." Xilian slightly inclined his head. "Yes." Thus he picked out the important bits and reported his journey to Mount Tonglu and the incidents that occurred while exploring the kingdom of Wuyong. The more the crowd listened, the wider their eyes became. Never mind Fengxin and Mu Cheng's. After the report was done, Junwu spoke up slowly. "And yet, I have never heard of the kingdom of Wuyong before." The other officials all agreed. "I've never heard it before either. It was 2,000 years ago, after all. Traces of it must have been wiped intentionally." Mei Nianqing hadn't spoken a single word throughout it all. Xilian turned to him. "Guosha, the crown prince of Wuyong is White No Face. Am I right?" "Yes," Mei Nianqing answered. "He knew it." Pei Ming spoke as he mused. "Then who left those murals behind? And who destroyed the last painting? I don't know who left those murals behind, Shilin responded. But I think the last painting was destroyed by White No Face or his subordinates. After all, he didn't want anyone to know of his identity. He turned to Mei Nianqing. And you are the subordinate of the Crown Prince of Wuyang, which made him the subordinate of White No Face. Mei Nianqing didn't speak. Shilin had a sudden urge to ask him. Back when Shen Le fell, had Gosha known that creature was White No Face? Which also meant they were colluding, and Gosha was even his helper. However, in the end, he asked a different question instead. Where is White No Face now? The Gosha didn't answer. Why did White No Face have to bring ruin to Shenle? Shilin questioned. Again, there was no answer. Why do you want to kill me? Shilin demanded. Mei Nianqing finally spoke. Your Highness, I never wanted to kill you. Then why were you coming for my throat down there? Shilin asked. Mei Nianqing asked back. If I strangled you, would you have died? Would the one next to you allow me to succeed? That was true, but that didn't mean that Mei Nianqing didn't have killing intent, since his reaction was completely subconscious at the time. Mei Nianqing probably knew that he couldn't convince Shilin, so he stopped trying to argue. After a moment of silence, Shilin finally asked the question that he wanted the answer to the most. What did you want to awaken in me? Shilin asked. Junwu had told him that Gosha seemed to want to awaken something within him, but what could it be? Mei Nianqing stared at him strangely. Inside his sleeves, Shilin's hands were clenched into fists. Gosha, go ahead and tell me. Shilin had always felt vaguely uneasy. The path of the fate of that Crown Prince of Wuyang was so similar to his own. Could there really be some sort of hidden connection between himself and White No Face? This was something he must verify, since he couldn't allow a creature like White No Face to have any sort of connection to himself. Yet he was also very afraid that White No Face really did have something to do with him. Mei Nianqing watched him, and a moment later he replied, Your Highness, these questions you ask, it's not quite the right time for me to answer them. Even if I do answer, you might not believe me. After a pause, he continued, However, there is one thing I can answer you right now. Mei Nianqing slowly enunciated each word. Right now, White No Face is inside this great martial hall. He is standing right before me. Who was standing right before him? It was Shilin. Shilin instantly backed a few steps away, seeming to want to avoid being in that spot. The closest person next to them was Feng Xin, and he exclaimed, Gosha, you open your eyes and look properly at the person in front of you. It's His Highness, your disciple. However, there were other voices too. Further away, there were heavenly officials who covered their mouths and whispered. Could it be that His Highness and White No Face share a split soul? What's a split soul? It's when a person's soul is split in half or broken into two sides. Each half has its own memories, and their personalities and skills would be different too. Perhaps even the appearance could be different as well. That's very possible. I've heard of cases like that too. If it's really like that, what should we do? Is His Highness the Crown Prince the white-clothed calamity? Such voices were coming from all around, and Xielin himself started to doubt too. Was he white no face? Had it always been like this? Could it be that it was he himself who had brought ruin to Shenle? That it was he who tortured himself for 800 years? Everything up until now. Was he the one to blame? There was clamoring noise all around within the hall. All the heavenly officials were whispering with various expressions. Even Feng Xin didn't know what to say anymore, or what to believe. As for Junwu, he stood up and said, "Shenle, calm yourself." But Xielin was falling apart. I. Was everything really all his fault? If it really was him, then what should he do? He didn't know. Just as he was drowning in confusion, a voice suddenly rang in his mind. "No, I can swear that you are you. You're not anyone else. Trust me." Sanlang. Hua Cheng had once said that it couldn't be him. It could never be his fault. Having thought this, Xielin's mind was instantly cleared, and he steadied himself, standing his ground. Junwu, however, had already descended from his throne and came to his side. "Shenle, calm down first." Xielin was about to look up to give a composed response, when unexpectedly right then, Mei Nianqing suddenly reached out and pulled out the sacred sword that hung on Feng Xin's waist. Xielin was just about to look up and give a composed response, when unexpectedly right then, Mei Nianqing suddenly reached out, pulled out the sacred sword that hung on Feng Xin's waist, and lunged at Junwu. All the heavenly officials cried out. However, both Junwu and Xielin were martial gods, the best in their field no less. So why would they care for such a low-level sneak attack? The point of the blade hadn't even touched Junwu before Xielin's fingers had already flashed out as fast as lightning and seized that shining, snow-white blade, catching it right before his eyes. Feng Xin came back to his senses and immediately rushed up to restrain Guo. That he dared to attempt an assassination within the great martial hall, and in front of so many martial gods too. He was asking for his death. Feng Xin exclaimed, "Guo, what you're doing is pointless." However, while Mei Nianqing struggled uselessly, he roared at Xielin at the same time. "Look! Take a look! Quick!" Yin Yu rushed up. "Your Highness, are you all right? What's happened?" From afar, Mu Qing was alarmed. "Look at what? What does he mean? What is he planning?" It was pandemonium, but for a good while, Xielin hadn't moved a muscle. It wasn't because of anything else. It was because he saw something reflected on that snow-white blade. A face. The composed and handsome face of a youth. And growing on this face were 3 other faces. Those 3 tiny faces were squished on this person's face, ruining that handsome complexion, making it appear chillingly horrifying. Even the 5 features seemed to be contorting. Half of the face appeared to be crying, while the other half appeared to be smiling. That face should have been infinitely familiar to Xielin. Yet right then, in the mirror-like blade, the face was so foreign it was terrifying. So much so that Xielin was drenched in cold sweat. Only then did he remember that the sword Feng Xin carried with him was Hongjing, the mirror that revealed evil. When ghosts entered the mirror, they could not hide. From this angle, what Hong Jing reflected wasn't his own face, but the face of the one who was standing behind him. And upon that face was a pair of dark, solemn eyes that were currently watching him closely. Xilian's pupils slowly shrank. It was as if his movements had slowed, and as his mouth opened slowly, his wrist suddenly stiffened. A powerful hand had seized his wrist, and behind him, Junwu smiled. Shenle, what are you looking at?